Very excited to welcome Claire Snowden-Darling to the Sexy Aging podcast. Welcome along, Claire.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the name of your podcast. It's brilliant.
It's the paradox, isn't it? It's like, is it sexy? Is it aging? What can those two words be together? I think that's the question.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we want to go with the conversation. I'm just going to do a really brief introduction on you, and I really would love you to tell us all about yourself. But what I found is that you have quite an impressive resume, Claire, and I'll invite you to share more about that with the listeners. But the reason I've invited you to speak today is because of your harrowing birth story that took you on the journey to find out more about women's health, how we can deal with it, and of course menopausal health that brings or hormonal health that brings us to perimenopause and menopause and your work around that. So handing the microphone to you, Claire, batter up.
Okay, so in 2004, I gave birth to my daughter, and we had the most horrendous labor. And it was 3-day labor, and basically both of us nearly died. It was horribly mismanaged due to the times that I went into labor. I should have been given an emergency C-section many hours before I was given it, but because of staffing, they decided to just keep me in limbo, and that keeping me in limbo for basically 9 hours until the morning shift came on, my body just completely fell apart, because they just kept giving me more drugs, more intervention, anything just to keep me going until the 10 a.m. the 10 a.m. surgical shift could get in. And I can understand it from a business perspective, but basically what happened for me, I can understand it from, how that model has to work, but
what about the fact that you're a human?
Exactly. I do understand why they work like that, but ultimately it was completely the wrong decision for me, and my daughter got very, very distressed. My blood pressure was just dropping, and my heart rate was dropping. And so by the time I went into the emergency C-section, it was a case of they kept on having to keep my husband like literally pinching my ears and keeping me awake because I was trying to pass out. And they said, if she passes out, she's with her heart rate that low, she's going to die. I mean, it was just awful. And then I remember this situation during the surgery where this woman just popped her head out, and I remember at the time thinking it was almost comical because it was like a Hammer horror. I mean, she was just covered in blood, and I was like, okay. And she said, "Did you want to breastfeed, dear?" And I went, "Yes, I did want to try." And she said, "Right." And she popped her head back, and I was never told anything else about it. And basically what I found out 4 days later was I'd had a placental hemorrhage and lost, nearly 2 liters, which they should have replaced. But they thought, oh, well, she wants to breastfeed, so we won't. So, long story short, when I came round in recovery, I barely came round. I was utterly exhausted, and that exhaustion never left me. It was such a big trauma, the surgery and the hemorrhage, that it actually put me into chronic fatigue. It put me into, we're seeing it now all over the world with this, post-viral fatigue, but it's the same situation, just a different trigger. So this horrendous chronic fatigue, and I didn't recover from surgery very well because I didn't have enough blood. Of course, I couldn't really feed her very well because I wasn't getting my milk in. It was just a couple of, weeks of horrendousn's and not being told what had happened to me. And I found it because the health visitor accidentally left my notes. Just not knowing what was going on. And then, I was 27 years old. So thinking that I was just doing this all wrong and I can't do it and it's me. And it was awful. So I was left not only with the fatigue, but quite quickly afterwards, this realization that I couldn't be alone with my baby because I had postpartum psychosis. And it was one of those irrational, well, if she's crying a lot, I just need to put her outside the house, or I just need to, that kind of thing. So it was definitely not right. And when that passed, that then led to 3 years of horrendous postnatal depression, which I did come out of, but the fatigue never left. And it was the fatigue and just trying to feel a bit more like myself that got me onto the path of doing a bit of exercise and eating a bit better, which is how a lot of this starts, I think, our interest in women's health. And it was then when I was starting to eat better that I went to an event with some of these health food bars. I was actually helping market them, and somebody said, oh, they're doing kinesiology tasters upstairs, and every hair on my body stood up on end. And I went upstairs and the woman said, did you want a taster? I said, no, I need to sign up to a course. And it was like this catalyst had happened where I knew I was going to change my life. And that is, ultimately what happened. But the chronic fatigue, ultimately, it was hormones being unstable. And not long after, so I was 27 when I had her, and by 32 my periods were irregular. The doctors were saying there was nothing wrong, no one could find out what was wrong. And I had 8 years of this, something's wrong, nothing's wrong, weight gain, all of the things, until at 40 or 39 I was diagnosed with premature menopause. So the doctors never said it was to do with my birth trauma. It was just such a clear line for me that I'd never really managed to get myself right, and then thrown into what has been also a very, very challenging menopause, and continues to be, because I went into it with this sort of, broken body situation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and you would I can see how you would think that, like how the trauma and everything, your hormones never stabilizing, things never coming back to normality, and then getting to an age where I was talking with previous interviews, and they're saying anything from 38. And a lot of women go into 40 and they go, yeah, life's awesome. 40's the new 30. And I'm like, you need to learn a little bit about what's going to happen to your body. and get on top of it, because you don't want to come into sort of mid 40s and not know what's actually already been happening to get you to that part where one day you wake up and it's like, what happened? Whereas you've already got this happening, and I can see how you would come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
So then what happened with your study? Like, obviously it's a really amazing thing that you can go through trauma and then you can take that power back and learn something to help others. So how was your journey with educating yourself around all of this?
Yeah, so I then went, and I probably didn't help my hormones, because I then kind of went off into this crazy, frenetic, oh my gosh, I am falling down the rabbit hole into the wonderland of alternative health. And it just all made so much sense to me. And my dad's a real life rocket scientist, so he's like science, science, science. But somehow I found the same knowledge, familiarity, knowing in all the things that I was studying. So I sort of threw myself onto this path, and I learned particularly kinesiology, nutrition. I just sort of, threw myself into it. But it became really frustrating. So by that point, had a very successful practice. I'd been in practice for quite a while. So, I mean, I was teaching up in London. I was walking my talk. I was eating the way I was supposed to eat. I was taking supplements. I was exercising right. The mindfulness, the gratitude. I mean, you just layer it. I was doing all of it. And I was thinking, why aren't I getting better? And at that point, the doctor still didn't have an answer for me. And I actually, after having a few sort of business crashes along the way, still dealing with all this with my fatigue, because I just wanted to feel better. And these erratic periods that were getting worse, and before I bled, putting me into, bed for 3 days, which I've never had, just unable to move, not even pain, just a fog and unable to move. And I actually had to take a sabbatical to Australia. And I remember sitting on the beach at Byron Bay with a friend of mine, and she, at the time, she's a few years older than me, so she was definitely starting to hit peri, but she was eating. She'd just recently become a single mum. She'd left her partner, 2 children, had only recently moved to Sydney, very, very expensive, place to live, having to suddenly provide. Her periods were awful. And she was just bleeding out, and they decided to put her on, I think, an implant, but she was eating really badly. And I remember just saying to her, you are so overwhelmed, and your periods are going to be destabilized at your age anyway, but the way that you're eating isn't helping. And I just drew in my journal a triangle. And this is actually where it all started, because I just had, and it's so simple now, but I just connected the dots between your periods are awful, but you're highly stressed and your diet is contributing to your stress. And I remember sitting there and looking at that going, what happened was I came back to England after my sabbatical, and my business partner and I were mostly taking a break. We were doing our own podcast at the time, but we weren't just focusing on any big projects. And I just said to her, I think I had a bit of an insight, and it would be a really great way of explaining things to clients. And I just sort of like told her about this triangle. And the next thing I know, she'd gone off and started doing all this huge amount of research and realized that no one talks about this triangle of hormonal health and how our diets we know that diets contribute to stress. We know that stress contributes to female hormone system fallout. We also know that the stress and the insulin are connected, but no one ever puts it together and says, if we don't take control of these two sides of the triangle, this one is going to be freaking awful. And it actually then stemmed to us creating workshops, and then it's actually turned into 5 accredited practitioner training courses, and then ultimately writing some books around it. And this is now what we teach. We're teaching these methods to practitioners, to clinicians. And the big exciting thing for women, I think, is so many of us are bogged down with things like irritable bowel syndrome, and so many people now battling autoimmune diseases, and we feel like, oh my gosh, my body is fighting me. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this IBS. And actually, when you realize that our immune system and our digestive system are actually just victims of this triangle being unstable, well, gosh, okay, well, I might not be able to do anything about this one, but I can do something about this one, and I can do something about this one. And so this empowerment starts to come through, I think, with menopause, with any of our conditions, when we understand that every single day we can be taking steps to change how we feel.
Yeah, thank you so much for the description on the triangle, because from a personal perspective, just so I can acknowledge what you've just told us, that probably happened for me, the realization that those 3 parts. So for me, if I create my own triangle, it would have been stress, sleep, and nutrition. So those 3 things for me, once I sorted out that, it actually has helped my dealing with symptoms, because I'm never going to avoid it, because I am a woman who is in her 3rd age experiencing estrogen dropping. So I'm going to experience, 27 of the 35 symptoms, apparently. Well, my husband confirmed them in episode 10. So he was pretty on the money, but it's quite amazing that the understanding of how stress affects me and how sleep affects me, and then how what I put into my body affects me. Like I'm so hyper aware that it's like, if I don't follow what I know to be true, it's like a little alarm bell that goes off in my head. And it's actually a really empowering thing. It's not like a guilt-ridden thing. It's like, I need these alarm bells to tell me, Trace, you can have that high sugar day, but you're going to feel it tomorrow. You will feel uncomfortable, irritable, you won't sleep well, and you probably snap at someone, and you won't remember the list of things that you wrote down. So all these things that you can say, okay, those are all menopausal, are actually just easily dealt with. Good nutrition, good sleep, and maintaining low levels of stress. So I 100% support you.
This is what I love about menopause. Having now, I don't even know where I am in it, but having now been going through the journey, I think since I was sort of 36, but sort of, since diagnosis, since 40, since tangible symptoms, let's put it like that, not just destabilized periods. What I find is this empowerment, and doesn't menopause just shine this bright light on anything that's not serving you? And it's almost like a challenge of, do you have the courage? Have you got the courage to change that? So that might be okay, well, I know I'm drinking too much, or I'm eating too much sugar, or I know I'm eating too many refined carbs, or it's that toxic relationship, or it's the negative self-talk around your body image, or you're over-exercising, or you're working too hard. Do I have the courage to change it? And it's just this invitation, I think, to drop into this real deep intuition about who we really are, when we get rid of all of the trying to prove things and trying to achieve things, just actually being where we are and who we are.
Yeah, Thanks, Claire, for touching on that. With the woman that you work with personally, just a couple of simple questions. What's the most common symptoms that they express to you of perimenopause? Obviously, there's symptoms that make them not feel well. What are you hearing today? And is it any different from a few years ago? What have you noticed?
So what I'm noticing is women are younger when they're first starting to notice well, they don't know their perimenopause symptoms. So it'll be I'm just much more anxious than I used to be. I don't know why I'm so anxious, or I'm just less confident. What's happened to my confidence? Or yeah, that's such a biggie, isn't it? Or my sleep's just not quite right and I can't quite get it back, or this weight gain. There's just something, and it's really sort of low level, but then noticing it and going, there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with me. And I'm thinking, yeah, those hormones are destabilizing. What I'm noticing with women who are more going through that transition, I tend to see the women who are having a really, really rough time, and I'm their last port of call. So they might have been put on HRT that's just not serving them. It's the wrong HRT. It's too strong. It's too they were put on it whilst they didn't have any foundations of health in place. And I think we're seeing now a lot of women where there is a high wheat diet, a high sugar diet, a high stress lifestyle. Now the HRTs are actually making them worse. Yeah, worse.
Okay, this is a really good conversation that I've
Yeah.
just had also with another kinesiologist and a naturopath. So while I am not vindicating one way or the other, because I believe in, in the medical field that there is definitely a place for everyone. But where we all agree is that your foundations of your own personal health, your sleep, your stress, your nutrition, your movement, and how you feel about yourself, if you've got those foundations from sort of 35 through to about 45, then your chances of needing HRT may be less. It's actually, there's not any necessary science proven thing, but it seems that if you are a really healthy person and then you come to perimenopause, you will know that the symptoms are there because, like you say, you start feeling anxious, and those things are like, well, how would they be related to my hormones? You have those questions. But what's really interesting is that, like, I'm 50, I'll be 51 next month.
You look so great.
51, baby, 51. And because I started this journey of understanding my body over 5 years ago, while I am experiencing the perimenopause symptoms, and I think I'm closer to menopause now, because I haven't had a period in 6 or 7 months. So I'm getting closer. And but what's really cool is I am not at the point where I'd be putting up my hand going, I can't deal with this and I probably need to look at HRT.
Yes.
But I can understand for women why, and I would not take that away. If I was in that place myself, I would definitely be considering it, and I would investigate my options for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and women who can get through on, either nothing or a little bit of chaste berry, or, I'm like, well done. And I'm so happy for you. And some women need a huge amount more scaffolding. And I do find the whole thing really interesting. And it's like, that thing when we become mums and there's that judgy mum, and your child's not doing that. And like, we have to stop that. We have to just allow people to be where they are on their journey. And this is one of my big passion areas is I often talk about in this situation, my Auntie Valda. Now, my Auntie Valda passed away a couple of years ago in her 80s. And so she was a stereotypical 50s housewife. And so the way I talk about how Auntie Valda would have lived her life is how we should be able to transition into menopause. So her life was, she'd get up in the morning, she'd get everyone ready for school and husband off to work, and then they would go and she would sit down, she'd clear away breakfast and sit down with her breakfast and a cup of tea with them, some music on, and just sit, for a bit before she went up and got herself dressed, and then, got herself ready and went out and bought the bits for dinner. Then she'd have a bit of a flurry with the housework, and then guess what? She'd sit down, cup of tea, listen to the radio. I don't know women today who have a little flurry and then sit down, listen to the radio, have a cup of tea, because our to-do lists are so massive. So I was on a panel conversation with a GP the other week, and she actually said the best menopause is one you've been preparing for, a decade before. And this is why these women, I look at my Auntie Valda, and they floated through with a few hot flushes and, tropical moment. But they aren't going through, women are crawling into my clinic going, I'm absolutely broken. I'm broken by what's going on, because when our ovaries stop making those hormones and our adrenals have to take over, if our adrenals are, right, I'm building this business and I'm doing this, or I've dealt with this trauma and this toxic relationship, and we haven't got it. We just haven't got it.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it does shine a light on today's world and how we feel that if we don't have a booking every single hour of the day, we don't feel productive, and the comparison factor, right? Whereas
Yes.
I feel like now that I think that's the upside. We talked about that of COVID. It has given us a chance to pull back and reevaluate what healthy living should probably be like. As in, like, you can get COVID, so therefore that's not a good thing. So that compromises your health overall, but really just across the spectrum of health, mental, emotional, relational, physical, what we need to be doing to have this longevity, this level of longevity. Right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. And it's exciting, that ability to really choose what we're going to do with our life, how we're going to spend our time, who we're going to see. That feels like those boundaries, that ultimately comes from deep self-love. And I do think that menopause forces us to start making those decisions.
Yeah. When you just getting to the nitty gritty now, like, so when you meet with a woman and she's really struggling with the menopause journey, what are some of the tools that you give her, just generally? Because I know that everyone is different, right? So, obviously there'll be a questionnaire that she'll need to discuss with you and break down. But generally, what's some top tips that you can help the listeners and the viewers start to think about?
So diet is absolutely first and foremost the first thing, and balancing your blood sugars. And so that doesn't mean just regular eating. It means making sure that when you eat, you're eating a protein source, fats, and the right amount of starchy carbohydrates. So all the green leafy veggies that that we can get, because we really need those, especially as we're dealing with all these excess hormones. And then, but being quite careful with our starchy carbohydrates. We need starchy carbohydrates, particularly at menopause. Our thyroid needs them. But when we have, a big risotto that's got butternut squash and sweet potato in it, and with a glass of wine, that's all carbohydrates, maybe a bit of fat. We need to be balancing that out. And our bodies will tell us you'll be getting more hot flushes. You'll be, just piling on the weight and getting the brain fog. So we have to become more aware of carbohydrate quantity at menopause, and definitely getting our fats in. So if people are kind of holding back because they're putting on weight, that is not the thing to be holding back on. We need the proteins, we need the fats and the leafy greens. Magnesium is huge for women, huge. And it does 300 things in the body. It's incredible. And it's not in our soils. We do need to supplement with it because we've depleted our soils. So there's so many different types that you can get, but I like to work with the magic 4. If you're constipated, magnesium citrate. If you have loose bowels or really sensitive bowels, magnesium glycinate. If you have muscle twitches, then magnesium malate. And then if you just need to really de-stress, magnesium taurate. That's like the magic 4. So like magnesium taurate is more like nervous system, and I'm wired. Malate is the twitchy muscles, and glycinate if you need gluing up, and citrate if you're constipated and need it to loosen. So magnesium is absolutely huge. I'm a big fan of women reassessing their toiletries, their cosmetics, and their cleaning products. We've got to get those endocrine, those hormone disruptor chemicals out. Like, they are not going to be helping you right now. And then mindfulness around exercise. So if you're beating yourself up with a HIIT class at sort of 7, 8 o'clock at night, do that in the morning. Don't be doing that at nighttime, especially if you're having sleep problems or weight gain. So really learning how to exercise. And it is a journey of surrender. So some mindfulness, and kind of, this isn't a war, it's something that's happening, and learning how to navigate that.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for your tips. I wrote down magnesium malate, and I just want to sort of frame why I've jumped on that, because it's the first time I've heard that. So I was teaching group fitness classes up until the end of the year last year. And I had one class that I taught at night, and the classes I teach were kind of borderline HIIT cycling. So it was a ride yoga. So in that way, yeah, it's pretty cool. So you get the cardio, but my heart rate showed that I was in anaerobic zone, and there was a point behind that, because the cycling was only 30 minutes. So my thinking was, let's go really hard because it's just 30 minutes, and then the add-on effect of the ongoing calorie burn is what people ultimately want. And everyone in my class is like 25.
Yeah.
So I'm giving them what they want, but I balanced it with the yoga. And so that's kind of a thing that I did. But what I noticed is that every time I taught that evening class, three things would happen. My muscles would twitch through the night. I would sweat profusely as if I hadn't stopped cycling, and my sleep was absolutely horrendous. So when I did switch off that class, or I stopped teaching, my sleep has restored. I don't have muscle twitches, and I'm not getting the sweating in the night. So if I can say one thing that you've mentioned for anyone, or anyone who thinks they're perimenopausal, if you are working out at night, and especially HIIT workouts, get off it.
Yeah, get off it. Yeah, we
Yeah.
have to rethink our exercise. It's really important. Yeah. And over exercise as well. That's another key. Like, if you're just battering yourself every single day.
Yeah. Well, I think how that happens is with women in their sort of end of 30s, that, the kids are at school now, so they have a little bit more time to dedicate to themselves or go for that morning run. They're hitting their 40s. They've been told, and there is that sort of marketing that 40s is the new 20s. So you should look like this. And so you beat yourself up and you work out and you do like a HIIT class twice a day. And then for a while there, you're killing it and you're looking amazing. Everyone's like, wow, you look so good. And then the hormones change, which you're not aware of, and you start to put the weight on, even though you're still training like that. So that's like a really, really common thing that I hear. And it's like, for me, it's really obvious. It's like, well, you're perimenopausal. And they're like, what?
Yeah. What?
Am I? What? Me? But I'm only 45. I'm like, you're so perimenopausal. Yeah, there you go. Thanks for telling me that, but you are. Yeah, and then they run for the hills in denial for like a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Claire, you also have written some content to support the work that you do. So I always talk about a book or a course or a poem or something that you would recommend. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've written and that you've put out there in the world? Yeah,
lots, but we so the big the book is actually, we have a couple of textbooks, which is very exciting. So actually we got to present our work to the Australian Kinesiology Association the other month, which was so exciting because I felt like Australia was the birthplace of it. So it was really lovely to get the opportunity. So yeah, so we actually currently have a couple of textbooks. So because we teach these methods to practitioners, not just kinesiologists, but any practitioner. We have a functional wellness coaching course for anybody who is a personal trainer, because aren't we fed up as women of being told by our personal trainers that if you're putting on weight in perimenopause, it's because you're not tracking it and you're in denial about what you're eating. Like, this has to change. It has to change.
So well, Claire, if I can just jump in there, it's just, I think this is one of the areas where there is very little information, is how to train a woman in mid-40s through perimenopause and menopause. Yeah. So personal trainers, if there's any personal trainers listening, this is the new billion-dollar industry.
Yeah, massively. I was on a Clubhouse the other day with this 27-year-old, I think, personal trainer. This guy came into a room on menopause and he just said, I need to hear from all of you because I have absolutely got to understand how to train you. And I was like, I love you. You're amazing. But yes, absolutely. So we teach these methods to practitioners all over the place of all different modalities. But the other content that we have is, all the physical stuff is really important, but actually so is the emotional transition. And so The other content that we have is we do a lot of emotional support work for women, and it's called Reclaim Your Life, and that is an online program. So we've got loads of online programs, and also lots of textbooks, but we do have, we're currently writing our actual hormone book, which will be out next year.
Oh, that's absolutely awesome. I mean, we are in the business of helping women successfully navigate their way through the third age. So thank you so much for coming on as a guest for Sexy Aging.
Thank you so much.